Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar. I'm Lauren Malorovich. I'm the Director of Marketing and Business Development at Simplify. We have one of our Senior Solution Architects presenting on today's webinar. The topic is SAP Analytics Cloud for Planning, Understanding Advanced Analytics. So please feel free after the webinar to reach out to Beth McBreen or myself. She's going to be today's presenter, so I will hand it over to her. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Lauren, and thanks everyone for joining. As Lauren mentioned, my name is Beth McBreen. I have been involved in the EPM space for the last 12, 13 years, focusing on products such as your business planning and consolidation, and then certainly the topic of the day, the product of the day, SAP Analytics Cloud. So today we're going to we're going to do kind of a snippet around advanced formulas, kind of an introduction to advanced formulas, what that means. We'll go through kind of a live demonstration. We'll build one together and show some additional examples, based on the time that we have here today. So a couple quick slides just to kind of set the stage as far as what are and more of a high-level understanding. So within SAC, you'll hear me call the acronym SAC or SAP Analytics Cloud. We have what we call data actions, right? It's a process within SAC. Data actions allow us to kind of create these flexible calculations. This is primarily for planning, although, specifically for myself, we're seeing it more with like reporting purposes, being able to perform some balance sheet rules or balance sheet calculations, for example, so that we can produce some of our full financial reporting out of Analytics Cloud. Those are some examples that we may see that are for kind of the reporting side and not just planning. Many times the data actions are really designed by modelers or more of your administrative folks. And then you have the planners that are leveraging the stories within Analytics Cloud, and they're able to trigger and execute these calculations. So again, this may be to produce a full financial reporting set. This may be to produce your budget or your plan. In either case, that's kind of the situation. You probably wouldn't have your basic users or planners going in and creating these processes or these data actions. That's really more from a more senior or, like we said here, a modeler or administrator kind of capability. Within data actions, there's a couple things that we can do. And so we've got actions that include copy values. So this is just really what we're talking about here. Many times we see copy values as, hey, maybe we want to seed the budget, right? We want to take volumes or prior year actual historical information. And we want to go ahead and see that with our current year budget to give us a starting point so we're not doing a zero-based budget. Something like that, those are where in the data actions we consider those copy values. There's also cross-model copies. This would be something as where you would want to transfer data from one model to the other. We see this in the planning process when it comes to taking maybe a more granular based model such as HR planning, CapEx planning, things to that level, and wanting to push a more summarized version over to my main consolidated model or my main finance model, right? I may have HR information down to a person level in which I want to go ahead and roll up into that cost center and then just push cost center summary level information so that I can do my comparative reporting. Finally, kind of the topic of the day within data actions is our advanced formulas. And that's kind of the third thing. So those are the three actions really that we would perform as part of the data action. And it's just kind of important to level set around the topic of data actions because advanced formula sits and resides within data actions, and that's how we're going to trigger the calculation. So to kind of understand, again, from a high level perspective, what are advanced formulas? If you have prior experience or exposure to BPC, business planning and consolidation, it's very much like script logic, right? Allows you to kind of perform these calculations, transformations and other within a script-like environment. It has, many different, myself coming from a BPC background, when advanced formulas became available in Analytics Cloud, it really, to me, kind of opened up the door in terms of being able to get very specific on driver-based planning, for example, and definitely other calculations, as I mentioned, as it relates to maybe just financial reporting in general. Being able to do kind of some of these ad hoc conversions, transformations, calculations has been a lot easier, a lot more flexible with the use of advanced formulas. There's consistent syntax. So if you have already jumped into Analytics Cloud and have explored formulas that can be based within the account dimension, there are some similarities and consistent syntaxes across the board. Whether you decide to approach it from more of a dimension or on the fly type formula versus an advanced formula that writes data back. I also put a snippet here of the help menu. One of the things that I always encourage, whether I'm talking to my clients, whether I'm doing webinars, is to really leverage the Analytics Cloud help menu. It not only gives you explanations of what each type of function does, but it also provides, many of them, I should say, provide examples. So for me, it's extremely helpful to try and tie it back and like, okay, yes, this would be a great way to leverage this type of function. Today, when I go through an example, we're going to touch on a couple of them, but this is sort of an introductory webinar on advanced formulas. We'll probably have maybe one or two follow-ups that might get a little bit more into a little bit more robust formula calculations, but we're going to take a look at things like the member selector functions. I have an example. We'll talk about time calculations, being able to use things like next, previous, to make things much more dynamic. We'll talk certainly about data and result lookup functions, as well as things like attribute instructions. So some of those are kind of key introductory functions that we can use to create some base level calculations. So one of the nice things with advanced formulas is that they've added not only the scripting capability, but also more of a visual kind of point and click, select what you want type capability. And I find this to be very nice and helpful, especially when we're introducing the concept of advanced formulas to completely new users, those that don't have a very technical background. They're business users, it could be finance users, analysts that are becoming owners of this new solution. While, in my opinion, even the scripting has a lot of nice functionality that kind of pre-populates for you, the visual side takes it even that much further for you. And so I'll kind of show you a little bit of that, but it's really where you kind of point and click, say, okay, what do I want the source, I want this to equal this times this, and it really allows you to just kind of point and click, make your selections, and it builds it for you. So, as the table kind of mentions here, really no coding skills are required. Kind of some of the drag and drop capabilities are there. So when we get into the live demonstration, I'll show you the difference between the two and how that works. With advanced formulas, there's also parameter options. And this was also an area that I was very happy with, because when we're going in and you're executing these calculations, you certainly can have the capability to restrict your calculation if you want it to just run on one company code or just run it for a set of cost centers. But if you also want to open this up, right, allow to include parameters, what that means is that as a planner, as a planning user, or somebody that's going to go into that story and execute these calculations, I have the ability as the designer, as the modeler, the builder of these advanced formulas to say, okay, I want my user to select what company code they're running, what time period they should be running it on, and what version, for example. Do I want them to run this on budget version 1, version 2, so on and so forth. So parameters give us that ability. So we can go ahead and we can define, we can have it fixed, meaning that they can't change it. So we're going to create an example that's very basic, where we're going to take units times rates to get to our revenue. And something like that, if we want it to always be fixed on budget, we could have a fixed parameter. Otherwise, we will have it prompt, and we'll show you how that kind of works, where we can go ahead and let the users choose. So script configuration, while we have also, as I mentioned, the visual side of it, configuration really is kind of in 3 buckets. You've got some global kind of configuration definitions, where it's, do you have a calendar year or fiscal year? How do you want to treat data that's empty? Do you want to copy that over as a 0, for example, or do you want to ignore it, right? So those couple options on booked versus unbooked data is really what we consider, where we have values or empty sets or 0 values. If there's a reason or where we need to switch account, ignore account type. So where we can flip the sign in certain cases, you may want to be able to do that for your calculations. So those are more on the configuration side. Scope, then the second piece of it is a scope definition. This is your member set. So what am I running this information, what am I going to run this calculation on? A particular time set, entity, and so this is where you would define your scope, right? Filter, limit out what you want. And then finally, the last piece is kind of the executable. It's what the calculation should be. So we'll kind of go through this in a live, so you can see how things pop up and kind of guide you through the creation of the script. And then finally, kind of on the data action side, just circling it back out, is once we have those advanced formulas created, we save that, we validate it, we save them, and then we access the right story, and we can apply what we call the data action triggers. That's just found within your story, your edit capabilities, where you can insert a data action trigger, and then you have the capability to, it has a little play button where you can run that, and it'll ask you for your prompts. You can design it, you can color, have it shaded or borders and things like that to make it kind of fit within your story and look presentable. But that's, at the end of the day, that's how, once you build those advanced formulas, that's how those formulas get executed. So they don't happen on the fly, or right away. They actually will be prompted, and you can say, okay, you know what, I'm finished with entering in all my drivers, for example. I want to go ahead and run my calculation and see where my, my P&L shakes out. So that's kind of the last piece of it, would be to actually apply the data action trigger to the story. Okay. So again, just a couple, those are kind of the key areas, as far as your advanced formulas, setting up your parameters, understanding how to create the actual script itself, and then applying it to a story to be able to utilize it. So I'm just going to switch gears here. I'm going to move into my live environment here. Okay. All right, so I'm within Analytics Cloud right now. I'm going to go ahead and navigate into, I'm going to create and go to my process and go down to data actions. So when I do that, it will go ahead and give me basically kind of a blank canvas. The first thing that it's going to ask me to do is to enter a data action name. And so I'm just going to say, it's easier to find, webinar, driver-based, something like that. I can enter in a description if I want, and then it asks me for a default model. Okay, so here's where I go ahead. Again, everything's kind of point and click. I'm going to come down. I'm going to select my demo model in this case. Then it tells me right away, once I have this set up, the first thing I need to do is save it. I'm going to go ahead and save it. Now it's saved out there. I can go ahead and start my creation, my calculations. So a couple things. I'm going to go, and if I hover over these, this is what I was talking about. This is all within the data action. We're not really talking today about copy actions or cross-model copy actions. I do have a couple slide screenshots. If you're interested in utilizing or accessing this deck afterwards, you can let us know. Those examples will be in there as well. But again, the third selection here is add an advanced formulas action. So here I can put, and maybe I can put revenue calc, since that's what this is specific to. Maybe I'm going to have a number of different driver-based calculations in here. I'm going to start with units times price, my average selling price, to get to my revenue. And then you'll notice here is my buttons where I can either choose visual or script. Okay. Now, if I were to go right to script, so visual just has, where we would start here. If I move over to script, it has a number of things kind of set as examples. And you'll notice that everything has the double slashes in front of it, which means that it's commented out or inactive. Okay. So if I were to, for example, remove these two slashes, it would go ahead and make that active. And then I would have to make a selection there to validate it and make it, run appropriately. But before I go into the script section, I'm just going to show you from the visual option, right? So I can have basically context here. If I expand down, this is where I can go ahead and add filters, right? So I can specifically say I want this to run on, a particular entity or company code. Maybe this should only run in local currency, and then I'll have it translated to reported currency. Maybe this is only particular. So in any event, this allows me to just specifically call out different filters. Then within the variable section, this is where you can define, as I mentioned before, similar to how it is in the script. Is this a calendar year? Is this a fiscal year? Do I want to have the signs flipped? And how do I want to treat any unbooked data? So I can edit any one of those, and I can turn them on. Another nice thing I think about Analytics Cloud is many times you'll find the little eyes that will give you additional information, right? So you might be questioning, what does it mean with the account sign flip? So a lot of that you don't have to necessarily go to the help menu for. You can just go ahead and hover over that and capture that information. I'm going to leave all that alone for right now. Those settings, the default settings are fine for us in this example. But now I want to start building it. Again, this is more of a business user, does not have coding experience. So I can come in here and say, you know what, I want to go on and create a calculation. So when I do that, it says, okay, well, what is your target? And then you can create your expression. So I can click on target and define what I want my target scope to be. So for example, I can click on my account and I can come to here, I type in revenue. And there we go. Under my operating income selection, I can select net revenue. Now, if I wanted to get very specific, I can do that as well. So is this net revenue? And I could add another scope and another addition. I'm just going to say okay here. And then this is where, hopefully you can see this is very easy to kind of build on. So I can go ahead and have either a mathematical expression, or I can, again, define what my source scope is. So I come back here and I can come again and say net revenue is going to equal units. Oh, there it is right there. So I can select my sales units. And I can add another scope. And when I do that, it also gives me a mathematical expression. So I can change that from plus to multiply. And I should have average selling price in here. Okay. So just, again, something fairly simple where that sets the calculation. There's a lot of different options there, but that is basically you are building the calculation right here, again, through more of a visual approach than having to have the coding selected. Okay. Now, nice thing is, visual, if I created this, I can come over to script and it automatically translates it into my script here. Okay, so it's able to create those on the fly. I'm sorry, just automatically. Now, the one thing is if I start with script though and I save it, I cannot get it to go back to visual. Not yet anyway. I think that's going to be an enhancement that might be forthcoming, but for right now, you can go either way. If you start with visual, you can also view it in script, but if you start within script, you will not be able to view it in visual. So I'm going to actually click over, given where we're at with time, and I want to show you a couple things. This is one that I had set up earlier that matches the screenshot that was in the slides, and I kind of want to walk through the parameters. So that first example was the visual. Notice I created this one in script. I no longer have the option to look at the visual view. So, but as we talked about, I've got my first kind of global configurations up here, these first three. I have them turned off. I'm not interested. I don't need them for our example. But again, sometimes for many of you, if you're running a fiscal year, that's important. You want to go ahead and make sure that you have this turned on and identify it as a fiscal year. Same thing for unbooked data. Those are the two that I see that we utilize the most, especially when we're running calculations that do have empty data sets, and we want to make sure that that copies over or that translates as a 0 and not ignore it. So that's kind of a nice function there. So that's kind of the top, that's section 1. Then section 2, again, is my scoping. So you'll notice what's different here. There's a couple things. I've got member set. So I'm going to start a new line just so you can see. As soon as I start typing, one nice thing, again, it tries to help you. It wants to help you with the syntax. So it's okay. I know that I need to select a member set. And then I know that D and the slash, these are my dimension IDs. Right? So that I can specifically call out if I want, maybe I want this to run on no cost center or something. I can select cost center, and then I can say equals, and then I can do a base member, and then same thing. So whenever I start to type, it wants to help me. So when we do scoping, you'll notice here, just so that, let's get rid of this here. My row 11 is telling me that time is going to be equivalent to time in these percent signs. Well, that's my parameter. That's my variable. So I'm going to show you the parameter section here. Same thing with entity set, right? And then finally, I wanted to just show setting up an audit trail where I'm saying, okay, I want my audit trail to pull in, and it needs to access basically all audit ID. It means that's my top node. It's my parent for everything, right? So all of this, it actually guides me through that. I can put a period down here, and it'll say, do you want to select a hierarchy to use? You can use a sub hierarchy. It doesn't have to be like the node. It could be any parent level. And you can also select any properties or attributes that are within that dimension. Finally, the third section then is your calculation. So everything starts with what is the result, or basically what is the data. So my answer is always going to be, in this case, the ID here, A44000, is my net revenue, or I should just say my revenue. So it always starts with, okay, that's the end result, right? That is what I want my data to be. So for my sales revenue, I'm looking up my result lookup. I'm looking up units multiplied, by ASP, or average selling price, or average sales price. So I'm able to do that very easy by saying, look up this units, look up this average ASP, multiply the two together, and that's going to equal. So it's just a little bit backwards. Rather than taking, A times B equals C, it's just C equals A times B, right? That's kind of the syntax of the way that you set up the formula. The parameters are up here. So when we talked about time and entity set and target version. So again, these are really nice when you want to execute these in stories and you want to be able to select. So target version, you can see I have fixed budget. If I come in here and edit that, you can kind of see I don't even want the users to be able to choose, because I don't want them to accidentally run this on actual, right? So I'm going to say fix this as budget. I could fix this as additional, not just budget. I could have forecasts or others in here too. Or I could do a variable where they can only select those options. Like for example, here, entity set, I could have them be able to go in and select any of them. Here, I'm actually prompting them and I'm putting all 8 entities into that value. So then they could actually run it for all of them. It'll default where it'll run on all of them, or they can say, I just want to run it on a single entity. Okay, so parameters are actually very important and can be extremely helpful as it relates to the story. So now I'm just going to toggle over to my story. And I'm going to show you just to kind of prove out our calculation. So you can kind of see here, I've got my units, my ASP, my sales revenue. Here's that, I didn't do anything fancy with the formatting, but I can come in here and I can design and I can change the colors. But what's most important is the ability to kind of come up here and say, insert a data action trigger. And then it opens this up, the builder for me, right? So then it gives me all of my different options, and I can select different ones to get to what I'm looking for. Let me scroll down here. I'll just select this one for a second. All right, and then it gives me, I can enter in a name. I'll just put test 2 here. Once I do that, it'll go ahead and create it. I can remove the designer. So I create, again, I just created the second one just so you can kind of see how. So it's very easy to just insert, apply, trigger to any one of your stories. So they can be placed anywhere. I have some companies that will create an additional page on their stories to be able to have their calculations, and they can kind of have instructions. Okay, once you're done doing this, come back to your instructions page and run your calcs. So there's different ways that you can approach it. It can be actually on your page, or you can have kind of an intro or instructions page within your story as well. But when I want to execute it, I can go ahead and click on the play button. Immediately, if you remember, version was fixed, so I don't see a prompt for version. I can see entity set, where I can go in and I can make a selection, and I could select all of the entities, or I could just select if I was a business planning user and I'm only responsible for one company code or one profit center. I can go in, and this could be profit center instead of entity. And then I can go in and switch my time. Here, I'll just run one period, but again, I could set my parameters so that I could run multiple periods. I'll just change this to March, for example, and then it gives me the ability to run it. Data actions, advanced formulas run very fast. So it comes in, it refreshes, and my number's there. So this has gone through all the profit centers within my company code, and again, has kind of run through all the numbers, all the different dimensionality. So from a performance standpoint, advanced formulas run very well. They're very effective. And as I mentioned, they're also very flexible. So I know I'm a couple minutes over time here. Hopefully you were able to gather some knowledge, some introductory knowledge around advanced formulas during our time here today. As I mentioned, if you are interested, I do have some additional snapshots around some other examples that we do with cross-model copies, some other real-life formulas, data and advanced formulas that we've created for reporting as well. So if you're interested, please let us know, myself or Lauren. And again, thanks for joining us today, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.